Welcome back to Between Two Racks with the Kilo Crew. On today's episode, it will be a continuation of the rapid fire episode from last week, but we have changed it to be not so rapid fire episode because we didn't cover as many questions as we expected, but we're going to finish them today, or that's the goal. So let's kick it. To get us started, the first question I have is kind of like a topic, but identifying and managing overtraining.
Okay. So before we talk about overtraining, we need to kind of define it because it's somewhat of a complicated topic. So, well, actually, like what's interesting is in 2006 and 2013 again, a large group of like elite personality in the world of strength and conditioning, like scientists, meet up with this big symposium in the hopes of truly defining what overtraining is. Because up to that point, there was a lot of like incohesiveness on what was or what is overtraining. So now, since then, we have a more precise definition of what is overtraining and all the sub-phases that can lead to overtraining. So basically, you have a continuum of levels of fatigue, from acute fatigue to like overreaching, and then like you have functional overreaching, you have non-functional overreaching, and then finally you have overtraining. But the thing is, the difference between functional overreaching and overtraining is very small. So it's easy to confuse both of them. So, but the thing is, overreaching is something that is very useful in sports performance training. So overreaching, what that is your training and your overall training loads. And by the way, training loads are a reflection or a combination of your training volume and your training intensity, or your training, the load you're actually doing. So you need to have high elevation of both factors in order to create a strength response. And if you have elevated training loads up to a certain point, it's positive. But once you get to the overreaching phase, what happens now is the training loads are so great that your level of performance will actually diminish for a little bit. But then if you're planning properly and you're unloading the training, you'll be able to super compensate and express greater levels of performance. But now the non-functional overreaching, what happens is now your training loads have been high for so long that now performance diminishes, and the time that it gets to recover from these training loads becomes too long. We're talking about weeks and maybe months. So at that point, it becomes very non-practical, hence the term non-functional overreaching. So we know that overreaching can be good, but if it gets to a point of non-functional overreaching, then it doesn't have positive impact on performance. Now, if you keep on going and the training loads stays elevated for a little bit longer and you reach that point of overtraining, now it doesn't take weeks or months to recover. It actually takes multiple months to recover. And at that point, your results, your performance will stagnate, and it's going to take a long time before we get back to baseline level. So basically, this is the point that we're really trying to avoid with training. This is why periodization of training modalities is so important. Now, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Now, when it comes to fatigue, we have to understand that there's basically two levels of fatigue that you need to account for with your athletes. You have what's called peripheral fatigue. So this is fatigue that affects the muscle, the contractile properties of muscle tissue specifically. For example, you might have low levels of intermuscular glycogen storage, which will affect contraction velocity or contraction output. So this is a expression of peripheral fatigue. You also have central fatigue. So that's when the nervous system itself has a hard time engaging and interjecting proper neural drive to create a forceful or a positive contraction. So these two factors needs to be in check in order to achieve high performance. Now, when it comes to overtraining, you have overtraining due to sympathetic output and parasympathetic output. So both of those will have different outcomes in terms of how your fatigue will manifest itself. On one hand, if you're overtrained due to sympathetic fatigue, this is when you wake up in the morning and your resting heart rate is elevated. You become very anxious. On the other hand, sympathetic fatigue, which tends to affect mostly endurance type of athletes, this is when you're so fatigued that your resting heart rate is drastically lower. And on a psychological perspective, for example, you're basically pretty depressed. Okay, you're always seeking for more sleep, and on and on and on. Now, how do you manage this, or how do you mitigate that? You have to understand that you will overtrain from volume and you will overtrain from high intensity. The most common one is overtraining through volume, which happens a lot with endurance sports, like swimmers, runners, and on and on. So this, of course, you need a certain amount of volume in order to perform, but you need to make sure that you have a properly periodized plan to avoid the prolonged exposures to high volume, and you need to be able to monitor on a consistent basis how your athlete is dealing to know that the training loads are not too high. And then on the intensity aspect, you can overtrain from too much or too high an intensity, and this usually affects like resistance training athletes. So this would be the guys who lift at 90 plus very often, who lifts at actual RM loads all the time. So this, again, the periodization plan will be very important. But how do you monitor it? There's different ways. Like, for example, we know that the vertical jump is interesting to monitor overtraining, but it's misleading because the height of the jump per se is not really affected by overtraining. It's the kinetic action of the jump that's a reflection of overtraining. So there's also been that study done by McCormick, which what they establish is that the ratio of flight time to contraction time was a greater indicator of overtraining than, again, just the vertical jump. So if your flight time decreases, but your contraction time increases, then you know, and this happens like consistently over a certain period of time, then you know that you're going towards overtraining. Now, the downside of this is you need force plates in order to truly assess that. On a more practical point, Zatsiorsky basically determined that speed or velocity of contraction was a really, really good indicator of overtraining. They're very interrelated. So if basically your sprint time drops significantly for a sustained period of time, again, this would be a very good indicator that you're heading towards overtraining. So you have to be careful. But one thing that's important to understand is overtraining is kind of hard to reach. Like it can happen, but it's most likely not going to happen with your Gen Pop training 2 or 3 times a week. Even if they have high life stressors, that's not necessarily how you get to a point of overtraining. Now, they did surveys with collegiate level, like endurance athletes, like swimmers. And on a collegiate level, only about 10% of athletes ever get to a point of overtraining. And also, it's been shown that the longer an athlete trains at a elite status, so if we look, let's say, at Olympic level athletes or athletes that are very elite in their mid-20s, now the incidence of overtraining increases. it's about 60% of these athletes will at least have one bout of overtraining once in their lives. But for most eye level, not necessarily elite clients, we're talking about incidents of about 30% of the time where you might reach overtraining. So it's there, but it's not that prevalent. It can even happen in youth, but it's just not that prevalent. You just have to make sure that you understand that there's a difference between overreaching, which is useful assuming you have the plan for it, and overtraining, which can be damaging because now we're talking about months and months and months of recovery. So you need to assess on a daily basis. There are physiological assessment like that velocity or that eccentric rate of force development, counter movement jump, but there's also psychological assessment. So if when you're talking to your athlete, if he's always like down, moody, mood questionnaires can be very helpful. Like mood is a very, very potent psychological indicator that you're going towards overtraining. So that's why like the app that we use with our online training, there's a little questionnaire that asks the general question, but it can give you a trend. So if, for example, for 1 or 2 mesocycles in a row, your client's mood is down and the energy, like the psychological energy component is low consistently, well, now that you as a coach, you might want to address this. You might want to lower volume. You might want to drop the intensity of training to allow some level of super compensation to happen so that the training interest and the mood increases and improves so that performance can actually be at a higher level again. So it's about monitoring, but it's about being cognizant of your athlete's state of mind and physiological outcomes as well.
Yeah, it goes like, as you're saying, it happens a lot more at elite athletes. And it sort of goes back to Zatsiorsky's fitness fatigue paradigm. Like, to create a high level of fitness, you have to create a high level of fatigue. So these elite athletes are trying to push as much workload as possible to reach the highest levels of fitness possible. But to get there over the years, they have built their capacity to do it. And the reason, it's not obviously the only reason, but the biggest reason that they will ever get to overtraining is they have had too much of a significant jump in volume load, like abruptly within training phases, and it's obviously prolonged, that they cannot recover from it. Generally, the ones that are very progressive in their volume load increases won't actually reach overtraining. They may reach non-functional overreaching if the period goes on for too long, but as long as you're very progressive in the increases in volume load over the years, they should be fine. And like as Steph was saying, they can occur in youth athletes. This is because they haven't built that base
capacity,
for the capacity for increased volume loads. And lots of these youth athletes are trying to play for multiple sports, multiple teams, and there's no coordination between all these parties to manage the overall volume load. So it's, like if you have your periodization right and your long-term planning right, it shouldn't be as big of an issue, but it still can happen.
And I think another huge part is making sure, and I know I always hear you guys say it, is to have the recovery in check, because I think a lot of people confuse overtraining with just under recovery.
You'll see that a lot in the fitness industry. Well, not the fitness industry, but in fitness competitions where they train like crazy for like 12 weeks, but they're basically not eating a whole lot. So they're not overtraining. They're just not eating enough and recovering properly.
Yeah. Well, we have a very good in-house example of this, Poric. Yeah. So because that was really, really, it was interesting, but it was not surprising. So Poric's 2023 year of training was extremely intense. Volume was, moderate. It wasn't crazy high, but it was not small. But the average intensity of the year was really, really high. That had to be the highest intensity year
ever
you've done, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And he had really, really, really good results. But towards the end of the year, he's slowly starting to like crash a little bit. And what was interesting is in 2024 when he switched to power, because Porg also takes his in-body like periodically, always in the same situation, same day, same time, the whole thing. And what was interesting is after a few weeks of doing power, which, yeah, the intensity is high, but it's a different type of intensity. It's velocity-based more so than load-based, but the volume is drastically less. And what was interesting is not only did he start feeling better, but we could see it on your skeletal muscle mass. It skyrocketed.
Yep.
Like you had a muscle mass super compensation, because people think that volume management can only be expressed in terms of strength, but even like physiological markers like muscle mass can be affected by overtraining or overreaching. So him, by decreasing the training load, he super compensated by an increase in muscle mass. So that's really, and it was substantial.
It was decent. I can't remember the exact number, but like another example of this would be if someone goes into a somewhat overreaching volume block with the intention of putting on hypertrophy, it's very likely that they will not put on any hypertrophy during that period. They may even lose skeletal muscle mass, but in the next phase, they'll super compensate, because you can only hypertrophy if you're fully recovering. During those super compensation blocks, the goal is not to fully recover. The goal is to be slightly on the edge of, is this too much?
Yeah.
So people have to just be patient and allow the process to happen, because it is all part of the process if it's in the plan.
And I just want to add a little caveat to what Pork is saying, though, because I don't want viewers to be like, oh, okay, so then I'll start training my newbie in the world of training in overreaching for him to gain mass. Okay,
you have to build.
Yeah, this concept will only work with the people who have like intermediate to advanced, who have a solid base of strength training. If you're completely new to strength training, you need, in order to increase muscle mass, you simply need progressive overload with manageable volume, and let the training do its job in a progressive manner. But once you get to a point where you're getting closer to your basically your genetic ceiling, now you need to be a little bit more clever with how you manipulate training variables to keep pushing the envelope of hypertrophy. Okay, so just be careful with that.
Okay, so I think an appropriate question, kind of as a follow-up with this, that I'll move into is, we brought it up. We discussed nutrition on the last episode, but the question was nutrition and supplementation. So I want to do priorities for peri-workout supplementation that we have, because that plays a big role in recovery for training.
Yeah. The really basic things, the things that have been there for the longest, are usually like the go-to. So creatine is one of our go-to supplements. We like to use ATP supplements, but they have a wide range of things in their products. But creatine being a really well established, well tested, it increases your work capacity. It helps you recover, helps build muscle hypertrophy, and. Do you guys want to end it?
For creatine? Yeah, and what's really cool about creatine is there's more and more research coming out to the mental and cognitive benefits of creatine, so just outside of the work thing. So, yeah, it's like creatine, I think, is still the most researched supplement.
Yeah, over 700 studies on creatine. But what's interesting with the cognitive thing that now they're seeing is the cognitive response of creatine monohydrate supplementation actually requires higher dosages than the dosages required for performance.
Saturating the cells.
Like 10.
Well,
for normally 5 is like is what normally we take, but
it depends on the size of the it's size related. But like so for someone who's 200 pounds, for cognitive purposes, they're talking about like closer to 10 grams per day. Yeah. But like purely on a athletic performance standpoint, I mean, that's been proven for a long time now, like 5 grams per day.
is enough.
If you're consistent with it, like it's enough to reap the benefits of increase.
They don't recommend the loading anymore. If you just can,
well, I think
5 grams.
The loading can speed up the process, but it's such a minimal difference that if you just do 5 grams within 2 to 3 weeks, you'll have fully saturated the cells. But if loading, you have done the week, but it's not really worth it.
A lot of women are scared of taking the creatine because they think it's going to make them, I mean, yes, you will hold more water in the muscle, but there's a limit to that. Once you've reached that peak, it kind of stays there. But some interesting research I've seen for creatine, but it goes back to the cognitive thing, but for perimenopausal and menopausal women, that they're really trying to push creatine for muscle mass, obviously, but also just for the brain health.
Yeah. So while creatine is definitely a great peri-workout, it's a great supplement for everyone, just for any situation.
We love the EAAs, the essential amino acids, to make sure you have enough amino acids running through your in circulation, so you're not using up your own, like breaking down your own muscle. And for recovery, I mean, whey protein is kind of like a standard. Like, it's great for the immunoglobulins that's in there, so it helps with your immune system, and it helps,
Well, it has a good amino acid profile.
Yeah, it has enough
muscle
leucine.
building. Yeah.
I know for me personally, like I'm avoiding whey right now because I do seem a little bit sensitive to it, but I take the EAAs during my training, but then I'm eating my meal basically post-workout, so I'm still getting the right amino acids.
You're getting that.
Well, but that's why we like the EAAs for you. Like I like EAAs no matter what. I think they're a good add-on for hard training people because you're oxidizing so much amino acids in training. I think it's great, but for those of you who don't do well with dairy, or like whey protein creates like gastric distress, well, EAAs becomes a very interesting substitution because at least you have you have the essential amino acids, and most of these formulations have the minimum threshold at least of leucine to trigger that muscle protein synthesis aspect. So to me, that's a really cool, easy to digest because it's highly solvable.
We've tried.
Man, let's.
Does it taste good?
No, but let's backtrack a little bit. I remember in the mid '90s, consuming BCAAs and EAAs, but they were tablets. Tablets the size of my pinky finger.
Couldn't do it.
And like not those gel caps, like tablets that were like chalky. I was taking those with my workouts. And then in 2006, 7, 8, then they started coming out with the powdered amino acid. No, the powdered amino acid solutions, but they were they wouldn't dissolve. Like you had this cloud of powder on top. Now they have instantized amino acids that dissolve super easy, so you have any type of distress in training using them. So if you're someone who struggles with whey, well, first of all, we really like whey concentrate post-workout because of the high concentration of immunoglobulins, so it has a positive impact on the immune system, and a few mechanical growth factors associated to that. But if you're struggling with concentrate, you might be fine with isolate. Yeah. So isolate, basically, it's a quote-unquote cleaner version because there's less of the lactose component. It's basically just the isolated protein. So this is typically easier. Now, if the isolate is hard on you, you could even try hydrolysate, which is even more processed, even easier to absorb. Usually people have no issues with hydrolysate, but at that point the process is a little bit more expensive. So that's where I find that the EAAs might be a user-friendly option that you can take intra-workout. So as you're oxidizing protein in training, you can actually use your EAAs as well. Plus, you have that leucine, most muscle protein synthesis trigger effect.
Yeah. So all you need is 8 to 10 grams. You don't need 25 grams of EAAs just because they're it's the base form, so you don't need all that.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely have more, but like you said, like 8 grams typically seems to fit the bill on a anabolism perspective.
Yeah.
I think what's fun, like just going back to the line with ATP, is there's so many different products, and then we play around based on whatever phase we're in. Like I'm in more of an accumulation phase. Okay, I have ENOS pre-workout. During my intensification, Myoprime. So it's fun to play around with the different supplements depending on what your training is.
We all like the Neuroprime for...
I take the Neuroprime
like just
regularly.
Alpha GPC.
Yeah,
we all like those.
Their Pentacarb is great for post-workout. I know I'm the only person that takes it, but yeah.
Well, no, I use it intra-workout.
Oh, you
in
do
my
use
high
intra?
volume sessions, so I put that in with my EAAs during the sessions.
Yeah, they're basically a mixture of 5 different carb sources that have 5 different release point and absorption rate. So you're gonna have a more
stable blood sugar
response to it. So depending on your diet preferences, depending on your workload, you might want to add pentacarb or a carb powder to your post workout. There's even there's this one I'm forgetting the year, I think 2011 maybe or 2010, which was an interesting study where they showed that supplementing with 8 grams of glutamine had the same muscle glycogen storage capacity as 60 grams of dextrose.
I was just reading that yesterday.
So for those of you, not that I necessarily recommend this for everybody, but for those of you who are on a really, really low carb diet or on a keto diet for reason X, Y, Z, and you don't want to consume carbohydrates, but you want to have sustained glycogen storage, because we know that if glycogen storage drops, your ability to build muscle will be greatly negated because of reaction with mTOR and PS60, whatever the chemical enzyme is. So that could be an option. So you with your whey protein post workout, you can add glutamine to the mix to help at least maintain your glycogen stores on point.
Replenish them.
Yeah, because what's going to happen is, because the interesting thing with glutamine, yes, it's an amino acid, but they call it a transaminase amino acid, which means that you will use that amino acid to do whatever your body needs to do at this time and point. So instead of using all of the other essential amino acids that you would use to build more muscle, you're going to use the glutamine to restore glycogen stores, leaving your essential amino acids intact for the building blocks of new proteins. So it kind of acts that way.
Yeah. I think and then before we move on to just kind of a few general supplements we like to focus on, I think as coaches, the peri-workout nutrition is often neglected with Gen Pop clients, but it's the one supplement you can control around the session, and it has a huge impact because we see so many people, like we discussed on the other episode, not hitting their protein. So this is a way to help with that, and it's the one thing where they're with you, so control that as much as you can.
And then it helps them with their recovery. They're less sore if they take all those things, so it makes it so that their sessions are even more enjoyable. Yeah.
But that's the thing too. And to go back again, man, I feel like I'm going to bring this word every single episode, but the context, situation of things. And so if you're one of these people that you have the perfect lifestyle, like you're a bodybuilder, you wake up, no stress, you go to bed early, you're single, you have this job with no stress, you train, you sleep, you nap, you have all of your meals, you have your protein goal,
you have a chef,
your calories is at a good spot, everything is good. Well, the peri-workout supplements will have an impact, but we're talking about like refinement, fine tuning. Like we're talking about like
Playing around with
a
it almost.
1%. Like it's like just refining, fine tuning, making you the best you can be. Okay, that's the reality. But when it comes to context, yes, the supplements will never replace the food. If you have to choose one, well, eat your protein target, eat your food. But the problem, and we all know this, like as trainers dealing with a Gen Pop that are busy, stressed, work a lot, skip meals, don't eat properly. It doesn't matter how often you tell them to eat. Now, these minute impact that peri-workout nutrition might have in the perfect circumstance, now it's going to have a huge impact for that person, because now these supplements will supplement their lack of nutritional status and will improve their protein target goal. It will improve their recovery. It will, increase their protein synthesis window, and on and on and on and on. So that's why to me as a coach, it's always been a easy, non-negotiable. Like you come to train, here's your peri-workout nutrition. Like when we worked in St. Louis and we had Gen Pop clients, the peri-workout nutrition was included in their membership because we knew how positively it could impact their training performance, their results, and their recovery. So I think it's something that with Gen Pop you can't disregard.
Then the stat that you always bring up during the hypertrophy course, like the train fasted versus non-fasted. Mm-hmm. I don't remember the number, but like the level of protein synthesis that you generate in a non-fasted state compared to a fasted state is...
It's 100 times.
100 times. So, like,
it's not worth it.
Like, if you have Gen Pop clients showing up at 6 o'clock in the morning without breakfast, providing that peri-workout nutrition is vastly going to improve their results, because they're going to be in such a better place to get, like...
And that's one thing that's been shown, that, like, you won't burn more fat just because you're fasted. No. So it's not... Don't do that for that reason.
Yeah. Well, it's perfect, like, with the... fast mimicking diet. I don't train during it. They say absolutely no low activity levels. Gentle walks is fine, but you're just going to burn through your muscle and not burn any more fat.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so then we'll go to some general supplements.
I mean, the foundation that we really like to is super basic. Multivitamin, you cover a lot of your bases with that. If you get a really good multivitamin, like, you don't have to take, like, the single nutrient stuff. And, it's good for, all the processes in your body, your immune system, it gives you a little bit of everything, covers your bases. Omega-3s for inflammation, brain health.
How much do you want to take?
Yeah, we won't
some.
mention.
Just some.
3 grams has been shown to be plenty of EPA, DHA. If you can get 3 grams a day, covers a lot of your bases. Magnesium and zinc. People are really deficient in magnesium and zinc. And even if you eat organic, you eat a lot of vegetables, the quality and of the nutrients in the produce that we eat now is just not the same.
Electrolytes.
Especially
in South Florida, where you sweat your ass off.
Sweat a lot. And especially, like, for a lot of us, we eat clean. Mm-hmm. So we don't eat processed food. There's no sodium in our food. If you tend to eat, like, the standard American diet, you don't need to be slamming, like, 1 gram, 1 gram of sodium, and you're not moving and stuff. So it's really important to do those. And those are, like, the basic. Of course, you can get into specific things. If you look at, vitamin D, we didn't talk. Vitamin D is also a really important one. Like, you can get into the fancier ones, but you also want to test. You want to make sure that you know the blood profile of the person.
Yeah, especially for vitamin D, you definitely want to know.
You want to know where
the deficiency is, because it's one of the, since it's a fat soluble one, it is one that you can overtake.
And then it's tricky too, because you can't just base off of your decision with vitamin D on where you live.
Yeah. No.
Because you can live in South Florida, but if you stay inside all the time,
or if you wear sunscreen.
Yes, you're just not like, I remember Preston Green, when he was the the strength coach at Florida Gators for basketball. He was saying that the 15 players on the team, so they were all in South Florida, and when they tested D3, most of them were like subpar. And that's because, well, they're inside training. They don't really go out. So that alone is not the most significant reason on why to choose to take D or not.
Yeah. And like even, you can't even say seasonality as well, because like during the summers is the time I see the least sun in South Florida because it's too damn hot.
Yeah.
So I'd be the opposite. I'd nearly not need to take it during the winter if I'm outside all the time. Yeah. But again, you still need to base it on blood work if you really want to know what you're doing.
Yeah, I think it's just like with the nutrition, with supplements, we can take what covers like a very general base that we believe in. But again, it goes back to being individualized and
for sure.
getting
and
your blood work done and knowing.
But to me, though, like for those who are worried of supplement fatigue, or you're a more limited budget, to me, like the one that you should consume on a daily basis as a security blanket is a good, high quality, broad spectrum multivitamin, because at least, you know, you're making sure that you have everything. Because the problem is most people eat the same foods all the time. So and a lot of people don't eat vegetables, so you're going to miss out on certain nutrients. And then if you're not a big meat eater, like your vitamin B spectrum will be really low, so your energy will be affected. So, you know, like you're not necessarily optimizing something specifically with a multi, but it's a good security blanket.
And quality matters.
Yeah.
Like don't buy your supplements at
Costco
or Walmart or whatever. Like you need, like, because a bad supplement is worse than not taking a supplement at all. So
some just have like poor chelated formulations that makes it harder to absorb, and it almost depletes certain nutrients instead of optimizing your micronutrient profile.
Okay. So that's supplements. So moving on, we're going to go into a couple questions on sports-based training. So first, I have what to consider when programming in season for athletes. So obviously this is a very, like, you can take this one way, super detailed or not. So I think we'll keep it more of like a general overview of what we look out for.
So very dependent on the sport, very dependent on the season duration, the frequency of games, frequency of practice, level of sport, like
the athlete.
Yeah. But as a very general rule, at this stage of the yearly training plan, will favour full body training sessions. We want to be very efficient with our training time. So full body training sessions are going to allow us to hit multi-joint compound lifts for the full body, have a strength, hypertrophy, power, stimulus, whatever we're going after, in one loaded like episode. So we're only causing that stress at a very specific time, that there's more recovery time to do all the more important things for their sport. Because in the end of the day, strength training is such a GPP side of team sports, or just sports performance in general, that team sport and any sort of sport practice has to take precedent. And obviously matches and competitions definitely have to take precedent even over the practice. But during a season, our main goals are to maintain hypertrophy, to maintain, if you're really someone who's on it, you maybe can gain a little bit of strength, but most likely your goal is to maintain strength and then maintain power output. But power is going to be reliant on maintaining your strength and maintaining your hypertrophy base. So it's all very interlinked. So generally, 2 sessions a week is a great target to hit. This will be enough volume to maintain all these different qualities. If someone wants to train more, they can, but it can't be at the sake of impeding performance in any of the other factors.
And creating soreness too.
Yeah. So like 2 times a week is, like, as a general rule, is most people's sweet spot. If someone loves the gym, they can do it more, but you just have to be smart with your training split and your volume load and how these sessions are organized and implemented in relation to their weekly schedule. We generally use somewhat of a daily undulating model in season. So the start of the week is going to be a more hypertrophy or strength bias. The end of the week is going to be more of a power to strength bias. So you can't use periodization models that you think are you traditionally use in the off season to try and saturate qualities, because we're not trying to saturate qualities, we're trying to maintain them. We're just trying to touch on them, make sure they're still there, and then move away before we cause excess fatigue. I'm trying to think what else.
Well, so little kind of like pointers to add to what Pork is saying to optimize the in-season. So the concept of training economy is very important. So keep your workout short and sweet, straight to the point, no fluff, no bullshit. 2, make sure that your tempos are not too slow. So like a 20x0 for your primary, 3010 for your assistance remedial is a good sweet spot, because if you have slower eccentric contractions or even worse, supramaximal eccentric work, you're going to create too much soreness and you're going to affect performance. Then you don't need super short intraset rest period. So because now the goal is we're not trying to build anything, we're just trying to maintain everything at a higher level. So make sure that you have full recovery so that your output can be at its highest on a repeated basis. So typically like anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes on average, 30, 35-minute sessions, if they're targeted with good general compound movements for that strength and power day and a few typical assistance exercise for the hypertrophy day, I mean, you should be good to go. Like if you're not half-assing your sets, you know.
Yeah, another one thing to consider is you don't want too much exercise variety. You don't want to be constantly introducing novel exercises, because that is going to cause more muscular soreness and a little bit more fatigue on a weekly basis. So if you can be more consistent with the exercise you use, the athletes aren't going to care. They don't mind doing the same things over and over for a while. What they'll care about is if they're leaving the gym and the next day they're sore and they can't perform.
Yeah.
Like to me, that would be something extremely wrong if a hockey player that plays 82 games a year that practices every damn day being on skates and practicing like slap shots would worry about getting bored from doing the same thing in the gym for more than 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Makes zero sense. Okay, so.
And then just one final point, because I'm pretty sure it was in Science and Practice, Zach Giorgi actually went and studied it and found that 2 30-minute long sessions per week is enough to maintain these qualities, but especially strength. But so that is the goal. So like hockey, it's hard. It is hard because they're playing so many games. It's a long season. You just have to get in at some point, but that's all part of being a professional athlete.
Because that's the thing, right? With sports like hockey or basketball or even baseball, because baseball is such a freaking grind. If your in-season training is too substantial or too complex or very dominant in terms of output, you know that by the time playoffs comes around, they're going to drop off. So you want to make it so that they're happy, they're excited to go in the weight room so that they keep on doing it when the season gets tedious and hard during the playoff.
Yeah, like American football has nearly got the luxury of it's one game a week.
Yeah.
It's
and
not
they're
like
home most of the time.
Yeah, it's not a very set schedule. Your games can move and to be in different days, but at most you're playing once a week.
Yeah.
So it's and there is a lot of sports like that, but it's just one of those that the more compounded that their season is and the more filled in it is, the harder it's going to be to get those additional sessions. So just aiming for the 2 30-minute long sessions starts to become much more realistic.
moving on, again, just as a reminder, context is everything because we were just discussing in-season training for athletes. This specific question is for youth athletes. What would you focus on for middle school and high school athletes? So just as a reminder, middle school being 11 to 14 years old and high school 14 to 18 years old.
So middle school, to me, it's fairly simple. It's if we're looking at these Von Bally's long-term athlete development, those are the, what's the term used? Train
for fun, or is it fun?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Train for fun. That's not the actual term, but it's something like that. So it needs to be fun for the kid to want to keep on doing it. So like, if you are doing strength training, it should be highly technical. Like, for example, I know that the Russians at that age, they do snatches and clean, but with like basically a training bar, and it's all technical work. They're grooving the pattern. They're rehearsing the pattern. That's what's really important. What's really, really, really important at that age is acceleration speed. So like doing like short distance acceleration sprints, change of direction work, coordination, stability, balance, mobility. Yeah. So basically the best approach would be on a periodization standpoint. You use like a parallel model, or like Bumpo would call it a complex model, which is you're training everything all at once, everything everywhere all at once. Okay, because we're trying to touch on everything, because at that age the brain absorbs everything, and that's how the more that kid does, the higher the level and potential will be in a multitude of facets later on in sports. So that's what you want to do. So at that age, it's not that I did it, but I didn't know any better. But when I was 11, I was doing Arnold's 2-hour program.
But you have a one-track mind. Yeah, you are not like the usual.
Yeah, generally 11 to 14-year-olds aren't going to have a massively long attention span. Yeah. So this type of training actually plays into their attention span as well, because you could say, all right, we have 60 minutes with these kids. We're going to do 6 different qualities, and we're going to spend 10 minutes on each. And then it's going to be more fun for them. You're going to get more buy-in. They're going to be entertained, to put it a bad way, to a better extent. But if they are enjoying the session more, you're going to get more engagement. Yeah. So they're going to get more out of everything you do with them.
Yeah. So that's what counts for middle school. Like, don't make the mistake of
putting chains and doing
chains and like 8x3 Hepburn method. This makes zero sense for that age. Now, the high school, now you can start implementing more like traditional strength training approaches. But at that point, it's more about, well, again, I'm using Bumpa's terms, but anatomical adaptation. So building joint and tendon resiliency, building range of motion under load. Building hypertrophy. Hypertrophy should be the base at that age, because everything in strength training is better leverage off of increased hypertrophy. Even like Schmidt-Bleicher's phase undulating periodization model is based off of the fact that your strength or power block needs to be preceded by hypertrophy in order to optimize the output of strength and power. So you need hypertrophy in the early stages if you want to have the contractile, like engine capacity to be a stronger athlete. So, joint integrity, tendon, tissue resiliency, range of motion, hypertrophy,
control,
technical proficiency. Now you can start building longer distance power endurance, or even like lactic power, lactic capacity type of work. You can start introducing endurance work, which you shouldn't do as much with the younger kids. So, at that point, you can still use a parallel complex model of periodization, in the sense that you still need to train multiple qualities to optimize the athletic potential, but things can start becoming a little bit more targeted and more directed. But in my opinion, the high school athlete, aside from the elite few that you always see every now and then, it should be targeted more to anatomical adaptation or hypertrophy type of work.
Yeah. And the problem with youth athlete training is you have to meet every athlete where they're at, because everyone matures at such different ages. Like, you could have a really, really mature 14-year-old who is willing to buckle down and just do a program perfectly and
eat the way they should.
Yeah. Whereas you could have a 14-year-old that doesn't give a shit about being there, but is told he is going to be there or she is going to be there. And like, in a group setting, you somewhat have to play to the middle of the spectrum, and hopefully the edges come in and still enjoy it. But if it's one-on-one, you have to meet the athlete where they're at, and
it can vary so much. Like, I've gone
so
from
much.
like a 14-year-old who can't move, like can't like squat, body weight squat, to another one who can, a high performer. So it really depends.
Guys, remind me, did I talk about that St. Louis kid on one of these podcasts?
yeah, the one that benched something crazy.
Yeah, I mean, so that's a good example, right? Like this untrained 17-year-old D tackle, untrained, basically zero training experience. Out of the blue, 1RM bench test with a 4.0x0 tempo, 385.
Blessed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, well, this guy's on another level, right? Yeah. But it's limited.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on, I have a couple more for us. This isn't really a question, so I'll kind of maybe turn it into a question. What was submitted was just power methods. So maybe we can do some of your favorite power methods.
First of all, it'd be cool when you guys submit questions. If you submit questions, not a word.
I mean, I eliminated a lot of words, but I thought we can turn it into something.
So power, we know, is best developed when you're training a wide variety of velocities. So, and in the presence of maximal strength. So people who focus just on doing power speed type movements are missing the boat, because you always have to maintain and build more. Well, you don't always have to build, but you always have to at least maintain maximal strength. Maximal strength is going to be the base of all power output. So generally our favorite power methods have a combination of both within it. Like a really good example is the Bulgarian method, which I did probably 3 months ago, maybe 4 months ago. But it is within a superset fashion. So there's a rest period in between the sets. You're going from a heavy, slow exercise, and it's only slow due to the load, into a light, fast exercise. And it's the exact same exercise, but it's a velocity contrast due to the change in load. So a very simple example would be you're doing 3x3 on a squat at 80 to 85%. You don't want it to be absolute maximal, because you'll be creating too much fatigue to express speed in your next one. But the 3x3, 4 minutes rest, then squat, 3 reps at 50%. So you're going from that 80% heavy. You're not going to be moving fast. You're probably going to be, if you're tracking your velocity, you're probably going to be about 0.45 to 0.5 meters per second, into a 50%, which you're going to be rocketing compared to it. It's going to be close to 1 meter per second. So that's a really good way to train two different velocities and expose the nervous system and tap into different motor units which are appropriate for each velocity. It's going to maintain your maximal strength. It's going to train the fast twitch motor units that are going to help you express power. So that's one really good and actually very introductory way to implement power training.
Because what's interesting with power, and people get confused with this, but power per se, the word power is a reflection of mass times acceleration. But the mass element is very load dependent, and the acceleration element is very velocity dependent. And power is expressed usually right in the middle of both. So the sweet spot between load and velocity. But in order to optimize power over time, you cannot just simply train at, let's say, 50% of 1RM as fast as you can and expect to be the most powerful person in the world. It would be the exact same thing as saying, well, I want to have the highest level of maximal strength. How do you express maximal strength to its highest potential? A 1RM. But it doesn't mean that in training you're going to do 1 year of 8x1. Yeah. No, that's not how you train it. So power, it's the same thing. To train power, you need to train that wide range, what we call the speed strength continuum, where you're training maximal strength, you're training explosive strength, which is basically heavy load moved fast. Mm-hmm. You're training starting strength, which is light loads moved fast. And then you're training reactive strength, which is basically plyometrics, which are body weight or very light load, done with a very, very quick eccentric to concentric transition time frame, which is called the stretch shortening cycle. So if you train these four, or you can even add max speed with sprinting. Yep. So if you train these 5 things on a consistent basis, you will bring up the power equation of the whole thing, which will make you a more powerful athlete. But it's very important to understand you can train all of it. But the base is max strength. Schmidt-Bleicher talks about it all the time, but even David Bem, he's a Canadian exercise scientist that did a lot of studies on this. And he's basically the one behind the intended maximal concentric acceleration concept, because what he's shown is that training really, really heavy, so we're talking about 80% of 1RM and higher, if you train really heavy, but as fast as your intent wants it to be, you still will improve power output, even though the load is really high and the actual velocity is quite low. But the intent was there. So the the central nervous system components of strength and speed were still developed. You still add more motor unit synchronization. You still add a optimized motor unit discharge rate that can translate to more power output. But what's very important to understand, though, is although max strength is very important for power, max strength will mostly affect your expression of power at higher loads. And the lower the loads become, it's still going to have an impact. But the lower the load becomes, or the lower the object you need to overcome, like let's say a pitcher in baseball, the less now that max strength will have an impact. So that's why at one point with these athletes, you need to start training at lighter loads really, really, really fast, so that you have a slightly more specific training outcome that will translate to starting strength for that pitcher, for example. But never forget, like Pork said, maximum strength is the base. And I'm a big believer in this. My upbringing in the world of sports performance obviously had this bias, but it's important to understand that their max strength is not dissociated. You just need to make sure you're training everything.
Yeah, a good example, if people want to visualize the difference between a baseball pitcher and a shot put thrower. They're both throwing a ball, for no better word. One is extremely light, and one is moderately heavy. I think it's 8 or 9 kilos. Yeah. It's nothing crazy, but the strength demands between those two movements are drastic. Most high level shot putters can incline press more than 200 kilos. Most pitchers can't squat 200 kilos. And they don't need to. Yeah. So it's just one of those things that if we're getting really hyper specific to the power demands of sports, you have to then really take into contention where in the speed strength continuum they need to perform, but as an overall display of power, you should train everything.
Another good example that I like is the reason why, at least in Canada, we've seen this all the time, the reason why so many failed sprinters become bobsledders is because in order to be a good sprinter, you need to have the strength to overcome the inertia of your own body weight. So you need substantial amount of strength. But to be a bobsledder, you need that strength and power component, but on a greater level, because you have to overcome the weight of the sled, which can weigh up to, is it 600 pounds?
It's something very heavy. Yeah.
Something like that. So that's why, like, bobsledders, I remember Charles saying that, like, when he was in Calgary, Team Canada, the requirement for front squat was 420 pounds. Like, you needed to have a 420 pounds front squat to even be considered to be in the Canadian bobsleigh team. But you needed that amount of strength as a base to be able to exert the type of power needed to move that sled at high speeds from that starting block. So again, can you imagine if all you did for power for a bobsledder were light med ball throws and jumps?
Yeah.
You know, you would be missing the point here, because you wouldn't have the strength capacity of the mass times acceleration component to move that
On
object.
the topic of power, I know Porrick and I both this year have been implementing some power into our training.
We're all in.
And then it was cool because you came up with the plyometric warm-up we did. It took us around 15, 20 minutes to do that prior to the sessions. And then Steph, recently, you were talking to me about a study that you read with the use of plyos, because I didn't have power in every single phase. I had some phases that were more just strength based, but I was still doing the plyometric warm up with you prior to my sessions. So I thought that study, if you want to briefly
that's
kind
really
of talk
cool. I
about
forget
that.
if I told you or not.
I don't think so.
So really, really, really cool. In 2012, Greg Hoff did this study where basically, because, so you know how, like, when we use undulating periodization for power, our accumulation phase tends to be max strength dominant, but at higher, like a 2-0 x0 type of tempo. So we're working on the mass element of the power equation, but during that time, we're not doing any type of lighter velocity-based type of work. But you guys were doing, during these accumulation phases, you guys were doing your plyo warm-up. And the 2012 study from Greg Hoff, basically what he realized is that the act of doing a velocity or a dynamic-based warm-up that used plyometrics was actually enough to increase the velocity element of the power equation.
That's cool.
In periods of unloading.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool that while you're de-stressing this in the core block of your intensification phase, you're able to maintain or even develop some skills in your accumulation phase, but via the warm-up. So that's why these dynamic warm-ups are really important when you're in your power phases. Like we were doing it, but for a neural component, but just knowing that it can actually improve it at the same time, it's kind of cool.
And then one other, well, maybe not one, another factor that people need to consider when they're introducing power is people are very gung-ho about introducing plyometrics and generally skip to the very advanced plyometrics because they look like the most fun.
Yeah.
But especially trainers are not going to have a good reactive strength index. They're not. You haven't trained it. Athletes might, because they sprint all the time. They do change of direction. They might have the ability to have a good reactive strength index. And if you can test it, I highly recommend you do before it and then gauge your level of plyometrics based on that. One of the main reasons I designed a very extensive plyometric warm-up, because my reactive strength index was nowhere near where I would want it to be before introducing plyometrics. So I didn't introduce any intensive plyometrics within the warm-up. It was very extensive. It was trying to have a lot of ground contact, or not times, a lot of ground contacts. Frequency, and different modalities, slowly building the intensity within the warm-up. So you're moving, like you're going from bilateral to unilateral, going from extensive to somewhat more intensive in terms of, like, say, a very easy example is like extensive pogo jumps, where we're just trying to get as many reps in as possible within 20 seconds, to intensive pogo jumps, where we're trying to minimize ground contact time and just go for quality of height. So you just have to be very progressive in how you implement your plyometrics, because if you go extremely intensive straight off the bat, you're going to be wasting training time because you're not going to reap the benefits from it.
And the extensive periods are also really great at prepping the tissue for it. Like the Achilles tendon, for example, it needs that workload.
That much. Like you will be sore from it.
Yeah, because I knew, like, for my goal within the phase was to reintroduce sprinting. I haven't sprinted in years. I want to reintroduce hill sprinting, but my first 3 weeks of reintroducing hill sprints was just doing the warm-up. Yeah. That was it.
Porrick, tell us what happens again to people who do like back strength training only and then all of a sudden decides to start sprinting.
They generally blow a hamstring if they're lucky, because if you're really unlucky, you'll blow an Achilles tendon, and that is not an easy rehab. Yeah. A hamstring is an easy rehab compared to Achilles. Yeah. So do your prep work.
Porrick, to wrap this one up, I have one viewer question just for you.
Oh no.
Oh, yes.
So, they would like to know if 90-degree eccentric isometrics belong in accumulation or intensification phases.
Well, so eccentric isometrics, which pretty much means
90-degree
90 degrees. Yeah, I know. Which is just such a ridiculous name, but it's pretty much you're doing an isometric during the eccentric. So can we not just clarify that it's actually an isometric contraction? But
I like that you're taking it seriously.
For most people, I'd recommend intensification phases. There is times where you can use an accumulation phase, but most of the time, intensification. Keep that volume low.
Okay. Remember, train smart, train hard, recover harder.
The game.